First of all, I just want to respectfully acknowledge the Kombumerri people as the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet. Sure, thanks. Sorry, and extend my respects to any traditional owners here with us today and to the 70-odd traditional owner groups who hold rights over the Great Barrier Reef. So my name's Gillian and I'm an environmental anthropologist from the Cairns Institute at JCU. And my presentation today draws on some work that my colleagues and I have conducted as part of the Traditional Owner and Stakeholder Engagement Sub-Program of the Reef Restoration and Adaptation Program, or RRAP for those who don't know, is a 10-year research and development program exploring a range of scientific strategies to help the reef survive and adapt to the impacts of climate change. It'll come back. You did. The RRAP Regional Deep Dive is a program of qualitative social research that's seen 117 intimate face-to-face interviews conducted with 140 people living and working across the Great Barrier Reef catchment. This has yielded a large body of qualitative data reflecting participants' everyday lived experiences of the reef, their visions for the reef's future, their emergent responses to the prospect of our interventions. And this has been used to foreground a variety of community perspectives and concerns within RRAP decision-making, research and decision-making. So the insights I want to share today are born not so much from a pre-existing research problem, but a growing research frustration that's arisen as we've listened to deep dive participants routinely provide us with these rich, nuanced accounts of their connections with the reef. And as we have, we've become deeply dissatisfied with the ways that people and communities are typically presented in ecosystem management as external end users with simple discrete interests or stakes in environments. We've also felt the illogicality of using frameworks that reduce and limit the way we think about the connections between people and the environment, and like the reef, especially in a time of change and uncertainty. So with this in mind, we've started looking at the deep dive accounts to see if we could more comprehensively tease out all the different roles the reef plays in the lives of our participants, not only as a physical but as a social environment. We've looked at the different forms that the reef different forms that the reef features in participants' accounts. We've looked at the different opportunities it offers them and the ways they cultivate and mobilise these opportunities in order to pursue particular goals and outcomes. And I'm not going to lie, trying to think in a non-reductive way, but still coherent way about all the ways the reef is important is slow, hard, and the results are really hard to explain. Sociological concepts, particularly Bourdieu's theory of practice, have helped us stay with the trouble of this. I mean, they've given us a vocabulary for sharing what we've been seeing. For those unfamiliar, Bourdieu sought to account for the complexities of social life, not just by paying attention to macro-level social structures or micro-level social interaction, but to the meso-level arenas in which social activities play out. And he used the term social field to refer to the configurations that emerge at this level as groups of actors engage with each other over some form of commonality, whether that be a shared practice or an issue or an organisation or profession. He likened the activity within the field to that of a sports ground, actors cooperating or competing to maintain or advance their position in the field within the bounds of tacit and socially agreed rules. Now, he emphasised two things as essential for operating in the field, or deeply connected to a field. The first is habitus, which is the embodied practical know-how and skills that actors develop in interaction with the field and use to kind of know their way around. And the second is capital, which Bourdieu defined far more broadly than economic capital as any kind of resource specific to a field that actors can accumulate and mobilise to get where they want to go. So how does this all relate to the reef and the deep dive? Well, the first thing I want to emphasise is, while the content and the detail of their accounts might differ, everyone we've ever spoken to about the reef in the regional deep dive, whether it be a scientist, a fisher, farmer or a traditional owner, has discussed the reef as three simultaneous things. First, they talk about it as a material, ecological and spatial environment, a set of structures, processes and substances, a community of living beings, and a series of unique spaces and places. Second, they talk about it as something, as a subjectively experienced realm. And third, they talk about something that's also collective, shared and negotiated with other people, like their families, communities, industries, institutions, and so on. So when they talk about the reef as something subjectively experienced, deep dive participants describe a range of embodied encounters with the reef. And these are almost always enabled by social connections and access to infrastructure or technologies like boats. Through these encounters, they gain opportunities to have effective and stimulating sensory experiences, to develop embodied skills and practical know-how, and to gain a personal sense of self, meaning and purpose, or what Bourdieu would call a disposition. We can understand this as the development of habitus, or effective resources cultivated in connection with the reef. Here's where it gets a little bit more complicated. As they talk about the reef as something collective and shared, people describe processes where they negotiate the reef as a social field in the pursuit of particular goals and aspirations. The two most common that we've seen in the deep dive are actually on the right-hand side of this, left-hand side of this slide, and that is, the need to secure personal position and livelihoods in the reef, and the need to build the well-being and power of their communities in the reef. To advance towards these goals, people draw on the reef's environmental resources. They also draw on their own embodied or effective resources, their habitus. They draw on their social connections. They use infrastructure, and they use these to create other resources. They create economic means in the forms of exchangeable goods, service and labour. They create cultural capital, which is a huge kind of type of capital, shared knowledge and authority, symbolic capital and so on. They create vocational capacity, so shared skills and expertise, and they also of course, create political power and influence. So, wrapping up, I'm very conscious that in talking about this, I've kind of distilled the world into a grain of sand, so to speak. It's a lot of complexity to show in a few slides. And like I said, the knowledge we create when we resist reductive ways of thinking is often really messy and hard. And there are no shortcuts. And in keeping with the theme of this symposium, it often takes courage and conviction. I want to wrap up now by just circling back to what we sought out to achieve with this kind of analysis, which is an inclusive and expansive way to articulate and recognise the significance and value of the reef as a social as well as a kind of physical environment. Now, the deep dive accounts have shown that the reef has multiple and heterogeneous roles and forms in the lives of participants, and it offers them a range of opportunities as they negotiate their lives. If we recognise these as different forms of capital, we can begin to see that the reef's social significance is not just something that arises in the moments it's used or consumed by people. It accumulates flows and saturates the reef, and reef capital can be found, yes, in its material structures and its living beings, and its spaces and places, but it can also be found in the skills and the embodied skills and dispositions of people who live and work in it. It can also be found in the connections between these people. And it can also even be found in the tools and infrastructure that they use to interact with the reef. And the most immediate applications that I can see for this kind of holistic sort of framework is to ask important questions about the existing flows and distributions of capital and how they might be made more equal and equitable. and to think more comprehensively about the social impacts and consequences of change in the reef, and actions and interactions to manage this change. And we can also think about better ways to care for the reef. So that's it. Thank you.